Edgar Cayce revealed, why water is a spiritual key hidden in the Bible and your body. Water, a substance so common, so ordinary, that we rarely stop to think about it. Yet Edgar Cayce, the man known as the sleeping prophet, revealed that water holds a spiritual power most people will never understand. In one of his most impactful readings during the Great Depression, Cayce stunned a family when he said, "Water is more than a physical necessity. It is a spiritual conductor." Imagine hearing this in a time when people were worried about food, shelter, and survival. To claim that water was not just about hydration, but a direct link between body, soul, and God, sounded radical. But Cayce backed it with explanations that merged the Bible, medicine, and the deepest truths of the human body. He showed that the water running through our veins, the water we bathe in, and even the water used in sacred rituals like baptism were all part of one hidden system of spiritual energy. And here is the shocking fact. Cayce insisted that neglecting the quality of the water we drink, or ignoring its role in spiritual cleansing, could disrupt not only the body, but also the soul's connection to higher consciousness. He was not talking about superstition. He was delivering revelations that connected directly with the words of Scripture, "Out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water." What Cayce uncovered was that this verse was not symbolic poetry. It was a literal key to understanding how divine life flows through us. During a session in Virginia Beach, Cayce went deeper. In trance, he spoke of how water absorbs vibrations. He said the energy of prayer over water changes its effect on the human body. Imagine this. Scientists decades later would discover the early theories of structured water, suggesting that molecules can align and respond to external influence. But Cayce had already described this in the 1930s. He urged people to bless their water before drinking it, to use baths as sacred rituals, and to treat springs and wells as portals of healing. To him, the body was a temple, and water was the sacred oil that kept the temple alive. Think of baptism. People often see it as a symbolic washing. Cayce insisted it was more than that. He revealed it as a spiritual reprogramming of the soul's energy field. The Bible says, "Unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God." To most, this is metaphor. To Cayce, this was spiritual science. He claimed that when water touches the body in sacred intention, it carries frequencies that recalibrate the soul. That is why Jesus used water so often in miracles. He did not need water to heal, but when he used it, he amplified its spiritual role so that others could understand its hidden design. And here is the pattern Cayce wanted us to see. In every moment of life, water is working silently in us, carrying divine light through blood, tears, and breath. But here is what nobody expected. Cayce warned that polluted water is not only a danger to the body, but also a contamination of the soul's pathway. He said during the war years that if nations poisoned their rivers, they would poison their spiritual evolution. Look at our modern age. Plastics, chemicals, toxic waste. And ask yourself, was Cayce's warning ignored? He was not preaching ecology. He was teaching metaphysics. Every glass of water you drink is either harmonizing your soul or disrupting it. That idea scared many who listened to him, but it also opened their eyes. In one reading, a man suffering from a chronic condition was told not only to adjust his diet, but also to soak daily in mineral-rich water. Cayce insisted that the minerals carried a vibration the body lacked, and through water, they could be absorbed directly into the spiritual circuits of the body. Within months, the man reported changes his doctors could not explain. Cayce always made it clear, water is the bridge. It is the bridge between physical illness and spiritual healing, between the body we see and the invisible energy that sustains it. He urged people to meditate by the ocean, to walk beside rivers, to submerge themselves in pure springs, because these were natural altars of divine power. Think about this for a moment. Why does the Bible speak so often of water? From Genesis, where the Spirit moved upon the face of the waters, to Revelation, where the river of life flows from the throne of God. Why is water always present at the most sacred points of Scripture? Cayce said it was because water is the universal solvent, not only of matter, but of spirit. It dissolves what is impure. carries what is divine and renews what is broken. When people asked him why Jesus chose fishermen as his first disciples, Cayce explained that it was symbolic. The men of water understood the language of flow, current, and surrender. Their lives prepared them to grasp spiritual truths others could not. And when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, Cayce said it was not an act of humility alone, but a ritual of transmission, using water to cleanse and to imprint divine frequency. Suddenly, everyday water in a basin became a medium of eternity. Cayce also pointed to the hidden link between tears and prayer. He once told a grieving mother that her tears were not wasted. In a trance reading, he explained that tears themselves carry an energetic imprint of the soul's longing and are received as spiritual offerings in the higher planes. Each tear shed in faith, he said, becomes a crystal in the river of life. This was not poetic comfort, it was his way of teaching that water inside us responds to our deepest emotions. Modern science would later observe how water in the body shifts with emotional states, but Cayce spoke of it decades earlier. He urged people never to suppress emotions violently, but to allow the natural cleansing of tears, because they are a spiritual release as much as a physical one. Think of that moment the Bible records, Jesus wept. To Cayce, this was not just sadness, it was a divine recognition of the sacred role of water in carrying spiritual grief and transforming it into compassion. Suddenly, the ordinary act of crying became a channel of divine energy. One of his most striking insights came in a session during the early 1940s. Asked why certain sacred sites around the world always formed near rivers, springs, or lakes, Cayce explained that water fields magnify spiritual presence. "You will not find revelation in the desert without water," he said. He described how underground currents often meet beneath temples and cathedrals, creating fields of resonance. He even suggested that ancient civilizations like Atlantis knew this secret and built their healing centers near specific water flows. That idea startled those listening. Was it possible that what we considered geology was actually spiritual technology? Cayce believed so. He urged humanity to rediscover the way water amplifies prayer, meditation, and ritual, warning that without this knowledge, we live half-blind. Imagine the difference between praying in a dry room and praying near the ocean, with waves moving like the heartbeat of the earth. Cayce said one magnifies the other because water remembers, responds, and transmits. And here comes the shocking reversal that froze listeners in Hopkinsville during one session. Cayce claimed that baptism is not a one-time ritual. He said every shower, every bath, every immersion in water can become baptism if intention is present. He explained that what makes water spiritual is not its chemical structure, but the consciousness applied to it. When you step into a shower with bitterness and anger, the water absorbs that imprint. When you step in with gratitude and prayer, the water carries that energy into your body and leaves behind cleansing. Think of how revolutionary this sounded in the 1930s and 40s. People thought of bathing as hygiene, nothing more. Yet Cayce reframed it as an altar in every home, a daily opportunity for spiritual reset. It startled people but also transformed their habits. Families began blessing their water at meals, praying before bathing, treating rivers and lakes with reverence rather than mere resources. And those who followed Cayce's advice often reported a strange result. They felt lighter, calmer, and sometimes even healed in ways that doctors could not explain. But here is what nobody expected. Cayce connected water to memory itself. In a reading for a man suffering recurring dreams, he explained that the soul uses water in the body, especially the cerebrospinal fluid, as a conductor to carry impressions from one life into another. He said the liquid systems of the body are archives holding vibrations that echo across lifetimes. To modern ears, this may sound beyond belief, but Cayce described it as plainly as doctors spoke of anatomy. He said that when we meditate deeply, the movement of these waters within aligns with the cosmic river of consciousness. That is when visions, insights, and memories emerge. And this is why fasting with water or praying near bodies of water often triggered visions for prophets throughout history. It was not superstition, it was alignment with the design of creation. In one of his most impactful statements, Cayce declared, "Water is God's memory flowing through man." If this is true, then each sip, each drop, is a direct link between the divine and the human. In the years of the Great Depression, many families came to Cayce not only with spiritual questions, but with physical ailments they could not afford to treat. Again and again, Cayce prescribed water as medicine, but not in the way doctors did. He spoke of mineral baths, of compresses soaked in blessed water, of drinking spring water with conscious intention. In one remarkable case, a man suffering from paralysis was told to undergo hydrotherapy in warm mineral water while prayers were spoken aloud. Doctors scoffed, but the man reported gradual movement returning. Cayce explained that the minerals activated by water carried vibrations the nervous system could absorb, and the prayers altered the water's resonance to reach deeper layers of the soul. To Cayce, healing was not just physical intervention, it was a partnership with the spiritual currents of water. He would say, "The Spirit moves upon the face of the waters, even in your veins." During wartime, his readings took on a more urgent tone. He warned that the destruction of rivers and oceans would not only harm crops and bodies, but cut humanity off from spiritual renewal. He insisted that when waters are poisoned, entire communities lose their vitality and sink into despair. He foresaw that polluted waters would one day become one of humanity's greatest crises, not merely as an environmental issue, but as a spiritual famine. Look at our present day. Cayce's words seem prophetic. He once said, "Guard well the waters, for they are the channels of the soul's harmony." His followers began to see rivers as sacred texts written in liquid form, streams as sermons without words. Each drop, Cayce insisted, carries the possibility of healing or destruction, depending on how we honor it. And here is the moment that left many speechless. In Virginia Beach, during a group session, Cayce entered trance and spoke of the future of medicine. He predicted that water, charged with sound and light, would become a primary tool of healing. He described treatments where frequencies would be infused into water and then consumed, producing changes not only in cells, but in consciousness. At the time, it sounded like science fiction. Yet today, research into sound therapy, frequency medicine, and water memory has begun to echo his vision. How could a man with no medical training foresee such things? His stenographer, Gladys Davis, recorded every word, and these transcripts remain in the ARE archives to this day. Cayce also drew a direct connection between water and prophecy. He explained that water reflects the heavens, both literally and spiritually. Just as the stars reflect on the ocean's surface, so too do cosmic truths ripple in the waters of the earth. This is why ancient prophets, he said, often had visions by rivers, lakes, or wells. Elijah heard God's voice after rain. Moses struck water from a rock. Jesus calmed the storm. To Cayce, these were not coincidences. They were demonstrations that water is the mirror of divine order. As above, so below, he said, and water is the bridge. When listeners asked what this meant for the future, Cayce replied that the next great awakening of humanity would begin when men understand the waters within and without. But Cayce did not leave this knowledge in the abstract. He gave practical instructions. He urged daily prayer over water, simple words spoken with sincerity, to transform the very glass one drinks. He recommended ocean bathing, not only for physical health but to wash away psychic debris. He taught that placing water near the bedside during sleep could absorb negative vibrations from dreams, and that pouring it out in the morning symbolized release. These practices shocked people who thought of water only as a necessity, but to those who tried, results were undeniable. They felt clarity, peace, and sometimes profound dreams that guided their lives. What Cayce revealed is that water, hidden in the Bible and hidden in our bodies, is the most overlooked spiritual technology we possess. One of the most extraordinary cases recorded in the ARE archives involved a child suffering from a severe skin condition that baffled every doctor consulted. When the family turned to Cayce, he entered trance and gave instructions that seemed too simple to be true. Immerse the child in blessed water daily, using prayers and psalms spoken aloud during the bath. The parents followed his directions with faith, reciting passages from the Book of Psalms while pouring water over the child's skin. Within weeks, there was visible improvement. Within months, the condition had nearly vanished. Skeptics argued it was coincidence, but the family testified that after years of failed treatments, nothing had worked until they applied Cayce's reading. This was more than hygiene. Cayce insisted the prayers charged the water with vibrational healing that the child's body absorbed. To him, the Bible had always preserved this truth, but modern society had forgotten it. Cayce also revealed a hidden dimension of communion that shocked some listeners. While most churches emphasize bread and wine, he pointed to the spiritual significance of water itself. He said that when Jesus turned water into wine, it was not only a miracle of transformation, but a demonstration of how water carries the potential for divine frequency. The water was not changed, Cayce explained in trance. It was awakened. This statement left his audience silent. If water can be awakened, then every drop we encounter holds a dormant potential, waiting to be activated by spirit. That is why Jesus walked on water, because he was in total harmony with its frequency. To Cayce, this was not myth, but spiritual science in action. But here is where his revelations became even more personal. Cayce taught that the water inside your own body, the blood, the lymph, the cerebrospinal fluid, is also waiting to be awakened. He said that prayer, meditation, and gratitude can alter the vibrational state of these waters, changing health, emotions, and even destiny. Imagine that. Every thought you think is imprinted in the waters flowing inside you. Every resentment poisons them. Every prayer purifies them. This is why he urged people to examine not just what they drank, but what they felt, thought, and believed while drinking. A simple glass of water could be an act of despair or an act of resurrection, depending on the consciousness you brought to it. That truth has staggering implications. And Cayce was clear, this was not meant to stay hidden in archives or churches. He said, it was the responsibility of every soul to rediscover the sacred role of water in their own life. He warned that if humanity continued to ignore this, we would not only suffer physical disease but spiritual dryness, an age where people would drown in distraction and materialism while thirsting for meaning. Looking around today, does that not feel prophetic? Our rivers are polluted, our minds restless, and yet inside every one of us, the living water is still flowing, waiting to be recognized. Cayce left us with a choice: treat water as a commodity or as a spiritual key hidden in plain sight. Those who choose the second path, he said, will find healing, clarity, and connection with the divine. Cayce went further, connecting water directly to the idea of spiritual rebirth. In a 1932 session that later became one of his most cited, he declared, "The body is mostly water, and it is through water that the Spirit renews the flesh." He tied this statement to the words of Jesus in the Gospel of John, "Whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst." Cayce explained that this was not just metaphor, but a literal teaching about consciousness. When the soul aligns with divine vibration, the waters inside the body become carriers of life force that sustains both health and spiritual growth. He even linked this to fasting and purification rituals across cultures. Whether it was Jewish mikvahs, Christian baptism, Hindu river immersions, or Native American sweat lodges, Cayce said all traditions were preserving the same truth. Water is the element chosen by God to reset the human being. And yet, he also gave a stark warning. In one wartime reading, he said, "As men pollute their waters, so will their minds be clouded." He foresaw a time when humanity's careless treatment of oceans and rivers would mirror an inner corruption, leading to disease, division, and despair. But he did not leave the prophecy in darkness. He also revealed hope. There will come a generation who will rediscover the sacredness of the waters, and with it they will find renewal of spirit. For his followers, this meant that every choice we make regarding water, whether blessing it, protecting it, or wasting it, becomes a spiritual choice with consequences beyond what we see. One of the most powerful demonstrations of this came in a healing that startled even his closest supporters. A woman bedridden with crippling arthritis was told to undergo a series of alternating hot and cold water therapies while scripture was read aloud. Her family followed the unusual instructions faithfully. As days turned into weeks, Her pain began to lessen, her body to regain movement. To observers, it looked impossible, but Cayce explained that the changes in temperature created vibrations that the water transmitted through her nervous system, while the words of scripture awakened her spirit, allowing the healing to flow. This was water, not as symbol, but as a living medicine. The woman would later testify that it was not only her body that healed, but her faith that was restored. And here is the revelation that ties everything together. Cayce said that water is the only element that exists in all three states, solid, liquid, and vapor, just as the human being exists as body, mind, and spirit. Ice corresponds to the body, fixed and tangible. Liquid corresponds to the mind, flowing and adaptable. Vapor corresponds to the spirit, invisible yet essential. Water is the mirror of the soul, he said, because it shows you what you are in every form. With this simple but profound analogy, he turned ordinary water into a cosmic lesson. Every time you drink, bathe, or even watch the rain, you are seeing your own spiritual journey reflected back at you. It is hidden in plain sight in the Bible, in the body, and in the rhythms of life itself. Cayce's final teachings on water were not simply about healing individuals, they were about the destiny of humanity. In his later years, during sessions in Virginia Beach, he spoke of a coming age in which mankind would either rediscover the sacred nature of water or face a great reckoning. He described visions of coastlines changing, seas rising, and rivers shifting, not only as geological events, but as symbols of spiritual imbalance. He warned that if humanity continued to treat water as nothing more than a resource to exploit, we would suffer both environmental collapse and spiritual disconnection. But he also promised that if people reclaimed the biblical and mystical understanding of water as divine flow, there would be a renewal, a spiritual awakening unlike anything before. He insisted that the Spirit of God still moves upon the face of the waters, and that those who attune themselves to this truth will be carried into a new era of consciousness. For Cayce, the signs of this awakening would appear first in the simplest places, in the way families prayed over meals, in the way individuals honored water in their daily lives, in the way communities protected rivers and oceans. It begins with a single glass, he said. Imagine that, a prophecy that world transformation begins with how you hold water in your own hands. He tied this vision back to the book of Revelation, where the river of life flows from the throne of God, clear as crystal. To Cayce, this was not a distant symbol of heaven, but a reality that could be lived here and now. Every soul, he said, has access to that river, because it is flowing through your veins at this very moment. The question is whether you recognize it, bless it, and align with it. And here is the closing truth Cayce left us with. Water is not ordinary. It is not background. It is the living scripture of creation, hidden in plain sight. The Bible whispers of it from Genesis to Revelation. The body carries it as its main element, and Cayce revealed its role as the bridge between flesh and spirit. When you drink consciously, when you bless your water, when you immerse yourself with prayer, you are not performing superstition. You are awakening a law of creation. In every tear, every ocean, every raindrop, the Spirit is waiting. That is why Cayce said, "Keep the waters holy and you will keep the soul alive." So now the question is for you. How will you see water from this moment on? Will it remain just a liquid, or will it become the spiritual key Cayce revealed, a key hidden in the Bible and in your very body? The choice is yours. If this revelation stirred something in you, share it. If it opened your eyes to truths long forgotten, let it flow to others. Like water, wisdom is meant to be carried forward, never stagnant. Join us in exploring more of Cayce's hidden teachings, because this is only the beginning. If this video touched your soul, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever experienced water as more than just water? Your story may inspire someone else searching for the same truth. And don't forget to activate the notification bell, because in the next video, we'll reveal another hidden key Cayce left for us, a secret that could change the way you see your own soul. Not an angel. That's the shocking truth Edgar Cayce revealed in one of his most powerful trance sessions. For decades, people assumed that when death comes, an angel automatically descends to carry the soul into the afterlife. But Cayce's readings told a different story, one that startled families during the Great Depression, one that challenged ministers who came to him in Virginia Beach, and one that still unsettles our deepest assumptions today. He said the first presence you meet after death is not always an angel. Instead, it can be someone you loved dearly, who passed before you, a trusted guide who has walked with your soul for lifetimes, or even the radiant presence of Christ himself. This single revelation changes everything we think we know about death, and it forces us to ask, when your moment comes, who will be standing there waiting? In one of his readings from the early 1930s, Cayce was asked what happens in the very first minutes after a person leaves their body. The sitter expected to hear the word angel, but what Cayce described was far more personal. He explained that the newly released soul is met by familiar vibrations, voices, faces, and energies it already knows. Often this is a mother, father, or sibling who crossed over earlier. For others, it might be a teacher of the soul, a guide who had been with them across centuries. And in rare exalted cases, the soul perceives a blinding light, a Christ consciousness that immediately embraces them. Cayce insisted this was not symbolic language. It was reality, experienced again and again by countless souls passing through the veil. This insight is not only comforting, but revolutionary. Think about it. If the first spirit to greet you is not some distant assigned angel, but someone you loved, or a guide aligned with your very essence, it means death is not a lonely rupture. It's a reunion. Cayce explained that during the separation from the body, the soul can still hear the cries of family members, can still sense their grief. But above all, the soul also feels the warmth of those who come to escort it. This is why he said, "No one crosses alone. Always there is a reception. Always there is guidance." And this is exactly where his teachings break with traditional dogma. The Church often insisted that only angels act as escorts, but Cayce's readings, preserved in the ARE archives, painted a much richer, deeply relational picture of the afterlife. And this leads us to a critical point. Why would Cayce stress that it's not always an angel? Because he wanted us to understand that the afterlife is a continuation of consciousness, not a strange territory where we are abandoned. The moment of death does not erase the bonds of love, nor the spiritual contracts we made before birth. Instead, it amplifies them. This is why a grieving widow might dream of her husband smiling at her from a place of peace, or why a child sometimes feels the hand of a departed parent resting gently on their shoulder. According to Cayce, those impressions are not illusions. They are the same forces that meet us at death. The continuity is seamless. The welcome is personal. When Cayce went deeper into trance during the 1940s, often in Virginia Beach, people pressed him with harder questions. If not an angel, then who exactly comes? His replies never reduced the mystery to a single formula. Instead, he emphasized that what you encounter is a mirror of your own soul's vibration. If your life had been marked by kindness, compassion, and a longing for truth, then the spirit who greets you would reflect that same love, someone whose presence instantly dissolves fear. But if your life was marked by bitterness or denial of spiritual reality, the first presence might feel distant, shadowed, or incomplete until you adjust. This wasn't punishment, it was resonance. Cayce explained that the universe is structured by spiritual laws, and like attracts like. The first spirit who comes for you is the one whose energy can meet yours without conflict. That truth shocked many, because it meant your afterlife experience is shaped long before your last breath. During the war years, as families lost fathers and sons on distant battlefields, desperate mothers wrote to the ARE asking, "Did he cross alone?" Cayce would reassure them, "No." Again and again, he insisted that the soul of a soldier, even when falling in violence, would immediately feel the presence of familiar guides. Sometimes it was a comrade who had died earlier. Other times, it was a parent or grandparent. And in countless cases, it was a figure of light so radiant that the dying man knew instantly he was safe. These accounts, drawn from documented sessions, carried an emotional weight that comforted thousands. They revealed a pattern. The moment of death is not a void, not silence. It is a gathering, a welcome, a continuation of relationships too deep for the grave to break. But Cayce also warned of a subtle danger. Some souls, confused or unwilling to release their earthly attachments, do not recognize the hand extended to them. They linger, they cling, and in those moments, the presence of Christ consciousness becomes the anchor, pulling them gently toward light. He described this not as a fearful judgment, but as a process of orientation. Just as a newborn adjusts to the shock of physical life, the newly departed soul adjusts to the shock of spiritual life. And in both cases, someone is there, whether parent or guide, to help the transition. As in birth, so in death, Cayce remarked. A pattern of care, continuity, and love runs through both thresholds. This is why the phrase "not an angel" becomes so crucial. It's not a denial of angels, but a correction of a limited view. Angels, in Cayce's descriptions, exist and play a role, but they are not the only escorts. Sometimes, what you need most is not a celestial messenger, but the smile of your mother, the steady hand of your father, or the familiar voice of a lifelong friend. And that is exactly who comes. The impact of this teaching is profound. It suggests the afterlife is not governed by unfamiliar beings, but by the same network of love and responsibility that governed your earthly life. You are welcomed not by strangers, but by souls who know you, love you, and are committed to guiding you home. In the early 1930s, during the harshest years of the Great Depression, families in Hopkinsville and Virginia Beach came to Cayce not only for medical readings, but for comfort about loved ones who had passed. One family, devastated by the sudden death of a young child, asked through tears, who was there for her? Cayce, under trance, answered with words that calmed their grief. He said the little girl was immediately received by her grandmother, someone who had loved her deeply in life. The child felt no fear, no isolation. Instead, she experienced joy and recognition. For the grieving parents, this revelation lifted a crushing weight. They understood that their daughter's journey was not into darkness, but into the arms of someone she trusted. What startled them most was Cayce's clarity. He did not describe a vague angel, but a very real family connection continuing beyond the grave. This case was documented and preserved in the ARE archives, becoming one of the most repeated examples of how his readings reshaped the American understanding of death. As word spread, people began to see death in a new way. No longer just the end of physical life, but the opening of a door to a familiar embrace. Cayce emphasized that love is the bridge, and that bonds forged in truth cannot be severed by the loss of the body. During one session, he compared the first moments after death to entering a room full of music. You do not understand all the harmonies at once, but you recognize a melody you've heard before. That melody is the presence of those who come for you. The recognition eases the shock and allows the soul to find its orientation. Again, not an angel assigned by decree, but a presence that resonates with your essence. This concept resonated powerfully with audiences weary of loss during the Depression. It suggested that even in times of economic despair and mass suffering, the spiritual world remained intimate, close, and personally connected to each life. Cayce's teachings also carried practical implications for the living. If the spirit who comes for you is shaped by the love and consciousness you cultivated, then every choice on earth becomes preparation for that encounter. In one reading, he remarked that the soul is never abandoned because the universe itself is relational. Just as we cannot live without connection in the physical world, we do not enter the spiritual world without connection. This was a radical shift away from the cold doctrines that depicted the afterlife as a distant judgment hall. Instead, Cayce described it as a continuation of relationship, community, and care. And this teaching gave countless people courage to face both life and death with less fear. Still, Cayce did not soften the seriousness of the transition. He explained that the vibrational state you carry at death influences who is able to meet you. Those who lived selfishly or destructively may find themselves greeted not by loving family, but by guides who feel unfamiliar, souls whose task is to help reorient them toward the light. It is not punishment but correction, a necessary step so that no soul is truly lost. In this way, Cayce's message combined hope with responsibility. You are not alone. But who comes for you reflects what you have prepared yourself to receive. That principle remains one of the most challenging and profound insights from his body of work. When the Second World War broke out, the questions that reached Edgar Cayce carried even more urgency. Thousands of American families were losing sons, husbands, and fathers in Europe and the Pacific, and they turned to Cayce desperate for reassurance. In Virginia Beach, he received letters daily, asking the same haunting question: was he alone when he died? Cayce's response was always consistent, and it echoed the message he had given throughout the Depression: no soul crosses alone. He explained that the soldier who fell on a battlefield might have felt terror in his final physical moments, but as soon as consciousness slipped from the body, he was surrounded by familiar presences. Sometimes it was a friend who had died earlier in the war. Sometimes it was a family member whose love had never broken. And for many, the presence of Christ appeared as a radiant light, calming the shock of violent death and carrying them into peace. This revelation did not erase grief, but it transformed it. It gave families a sense that their loved ones had been carried home with dignity and care. In one documented reading during those years, Cayce spoke about the power of recognition in the afterlife. He said the soul is drawn first to what it knows, what it loves, and what vibrates at the same frequency. That is why the first spirit to greet a soul is rarely a stranger. Recognition becomes the key. It eases the transition and prevents the newly departed from feeling abandoned. He likened it to a child waking in the night and being comforted by the sound of a parent's voice. The child does not need to see the parent to feel secure. The recognition alone dissolves fear. In death, the same principle applies. The soul recognizes a vibration, a presence, and immediately feels oriented. Again, not an angel assigned by duty, but someone chosen by the fabric of love itself. This teaching also redefined the role of Christ in the afterlife. Cayce never dismissed the angelic realm, but he stressed that the ultimate presence every soul must face is the Christ consciousness. For some, this appears immediately as the first welcoming light. For others, it comes after initial contact with loved ones or guides, but always Christ is there representing the highest vibration of love, guiding every soul toward its rightful place. Cayce said this presence does not condemn, but illuminates. It helps the soul understand its own choices, its own direction, and the lessons still to be learned. He described it as the great mirror of truth, the point where every soul sees itself clearly. This is why the first spirit may be a family member, but beyond that familiar hand lies the greater light of Christ. For post-war America, this teaching offered a new spiritual foundation. As returning soldiers rebuilt their lives and families mourned their losses, Cayce's message spread quietly through ARE study groups across the country. People began to see death less as a final separation and more as a passage into a wider network of relationships. They understood that those bonds, whether of family, friendship, or spiritual kinship, were not destroyed by bombs or disease. Instead, they continued across the veil. And this understanding reshaped how people prayed for their dead, how they faced their own mortality, and how they taught their children about the mystery of life and death. The phrase, "not an angel," had done its work. It cracked the old shell of fear and replaced it with a vision of personal, relational immortality that continues to influence seekers today. Cayce often returned to one principle when describing who meets you after death: vibration. He explained that every thought, every act, every intention builds a frequency that shapes your soul's experience. At death, you don't suddenly become someone else. You carry that vibration with you. And the first spirit who comes is the one aligned with that frequency. If your life had been centered on love, forgiveness, and service, then the welcoming presence would reflect that same purity. If your journey had been filled with resentment, cruelty, or selfishness, then the spirit who met you might feel distant or unsettling, not to punish you, but to help reorient you toward healing. This was Cayce's way of teaching personal responsibility beyond the grave. He was clear: your preparation for death happens now in every choice you make. In sessions about reincarnation, Cayce revealed another dimension of this mystery. He explained that sometimes the first spirit to meet you is not from your current lifetime at all, but from a past one. a soul companion, a guide, or someone with whom you had shared profound experiences across centuries might step forward. These reunions were not accidents. They were the continuation of soul contracts that stretch far beyond one earthly existence. For listeners in the 1930s and 40s, this concept was staggering. It meant that the afterlife was not only about heaven and hell, but about continuity, growth, and eternal relationship. To know that a familiar spirit from ages past might be waiting for you gave people a sense of cosmic belonging that traditional religion rarely provided. Cayce also described how these encounters fit into the greater evolution of the soul. In one session, he said that each life is a lesson, and death is the review point. The spirit who comes first is like a teacher who receives your exam, reminding you of where you've been and preparing you for what comes next. For some, this teacher feels like a beloved family member. For others, it feels like a wise guide whose presence has always hovered quietly in the background. And for those whose consciousness was already attuned to higher truth, the first greeting may be Christ himself, embodying both comfort and challenge in one radiant encounter. Through this lens, death is not random or chaotic. It is structured, purposeful, and deeply personal. By the 1950s, when Cayce's readings were being studied more widely, seekers began to notice the consistency of this pattern. Whether it was a child, a soldier, a farmer, or a scholar, the descriptions always echoed the same truth. Not an angel, but a relationship. Not a stranger, but someone known to the soul. And always, beyond the first face or first presence, was the light of Christ consciousness pulling the soul into clarity. This vision still resonates today because it speaks directly to the fear that haunts every human heart, the fear of dying alone. Cayce's message dismantled that fear. He showed that love is not erased by death, and that the bonds you form in life are the very bridges that carry you home. Cayce emphasized that while the first presence varies, the ultimate destination of every soul is the encounter with the Christ consciousness. He described this not as meeting a distant figure seated on a throne, but as entering a vibration so luminous that all illusions fall away. In that presence, every choice is understood, every motive revealed, and every opportunity for growth made clear. Cayce said that Christ is the pattern for humanity, the model each soul must align with across lifetimes. So while the first greeting after death may come from a mother, a father, or a guide, the deeper journey always leads to this supreme light. To meet Christ consciousness is to meet your truest self, stripped of fear and clothed in clarity. This teaching, far from being abstract, was grounded in Cayce's repeated descriptions given to grieving families. It offered not only hope, but a map, a way to see death not as an end, but as a doorway into greater truth. Today, more than 70 years after Cayce's passing, his words remain as urgent as ever. In a world still filled with war, disease, and uncertainty, the question, "Who will come for me?" lingers in countless minds. Cayce's answer remains consistent. It may not be an angel, but it will be someone who knows you, someone whose love or guidance matches your vibration. And beyond that, there is always the Christ light waiting to receive every soul. This message dismantles fear and reshapes how we live. If our afterlife experience begins with recognition and reunion, then how we love today becomes the preparation for tomorrow. Every act of kindness, every choice to forgive, every moment of compassion builds the bridge for that first encounter. That truth transforms death from terror into anticipation, a chance to step into a larger family of spirit that never leaves us. And now the challenge falls to you listening to this message. How does this truth change the way you see your life? If Edgar Cayce was right, and thousands of documented readings suggest he was, then you are never alone, not in life and not in death. The first spirit who comes for you will reflect the love you gave, the connections you cherished, the guidance you opened yourself to. And always beyond them, the Christ consciousness will call you toward light. That is the great promise Cayce preserved in the archives of Virginia Beach, a promise that continues to reach across generations. Death is not the silence we fear. It is a reunion, it is recognition, and it is the beginning of a journey into truth that no power on earth can erase. If this revelation stirred something within you, now is the time to stay with us. Like this video, share it with others who need comfort, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next message that may change how you see your soul. Tell us in the comments, have you ever felt the presence of someone who passed before you? Where are you watching from, and did this truth resonate with your own experiences? Your story matters, and by sharing it, you become part of a community that refuses to see death as the end. Together, we explore the wisdom Cayce left behind, not as theory, but as living truth. So stay connected and prepare your heart, because the next revelation may show you what waits beyond even the first greeting. Edgar Cayce once revealed something so unsettling, so precise, that it forever changed the way people understood death. He said the soul does not drift aimlessly after the body dies. Instead, it follows a sacred pattern, an exact sequence of days, each filled with meaning and transformation. And according to Cayce, the first 21 days are among the most decisive. They shape whether the soul finds peace, confusion, or purpose in the world beyond. Imagine this moment. Your body has stopped. The last breath has left your lungs and silence fills the room. Yet Cayce insisted, this is not the end. It is the beginning of the soul's most mysterious passage. In those first hours, awareness doesn't shut down, it expands. You see everything. You feel the grief of your loved ones. You sense the weight of your own departure. But you also begin to realize that you are no longer bound to the body lying still before you. Cayce described this transition as both liberating and terrifying. The soul in its earliest stage clings instinctively to the physical form it has just left behind. During the first 3 days, he said, it lingers close, watching, listening, even trying to reach out. It observes funerals, it hears prayers, and sometimes it desperately tries to send a signal to those it loved. Some families have reported sudden chills, flickering lights, or waves of emotion that sweep through the room without explanation. Cayce explained these as the soul's last attempts to connect before being drawn into the greater reality beyond. It is not imagination. It is the echo of a soul realizing its separation. And in this liminal stage, he said, the soul begins its first review, a confrontation with everything it has done, felt, and intended in life. This is not judgment by an outside force. It is judgment by the higher self, stripped of illusion, seeing truth in its purest form. By the 4th day, Cayce noted, something shifts. The pull begins. The soul starts to detach from the immediate environment and is drawn toward what he called the intermediate plane. This is not heaven or hell, it is a mirror. The soul gravitates toward conditions that reflect its true inner state. A life of kindness, compassion, and growth might translate into a luminous realm of peace. A life steeped in anger, greed, or cruelty could manifest as confusion or darkness. Cayce insisted this was not punishment, it was resonance. The soul attracts the environment that mirrors what it has carried within, and in this place guides appear, familiar presences, souls encountered in previous incarnations, or higher beings that radiate calm. Their presence reassures the newly departed, you are not alone. The journey continues. It is here, in these early days, that the soul begins to understand that death is not silence, but awareness unfolding in a new dimension. As the days progress toward the end of the first week, Cayce said, the soul encounters other spirits. Some are relatives, others are strangers traveling their own paths. Communication here is not with words, but with thought. Telepathy, Cayce explained, is the universal language of the afterlife. In this realm, emotions and thoughts are visible. They shape surroundings. If the soul carries guilt, it may experience environments filled with heaviness or shadows. If it carries love, it is wrapped in warmth and light. According to Cayce, this is when many souls learn a profound truth. Consciousness creates reality. What you think and feel does not just remain inside, it becomes the very landscape you inhabit. For some, this realization is liberating. For others, it is haunting. Souls who cannot let go of regret or anger may remain entangled in this intermediate state, held back by their own unresolved emotions. Yet those willing to release, to forgive, and to open themselves move further along the path. Between the 8th and the 14th day, Cayce revealed that the soul enters a stage of deeper recognition. No longer just observing or drifting, it begins to feel a profound pull toward what he described as the realms of learning. During this period, the soul's awareness expands beyond the personal and immediate. Memories from the life just lived flood forward, but now they are accompanied by glimpses of other experiences, past incarnations faintly breaking through the veil. Cayce explained that the soul, having stabilized after the initial shock of separation, becomes ready to face larger truths about its own journey. It may sense the presence of figures of authority in the spiritual dimension, elders, teachers, or luminous guides who radiate both compassion and firmness. Their role is not to condemn, but to reveal. And as the soul listens, it realizes that its existence is part of a grand continuum stretching across centuries and lifetimes. Cayce described this time as the threshold of education in the afterlife. Many souls, he said, are guided into what he called the Hall of Records, or the Temple of Learning. Though often interpreted symbolically, Cayce insisted these were very real dimensions within the spiritual world. Here the soul is confronted with visions that are not always easy to bear. It sees the ripple effects of its actions, how one choice influenced another person's life, how moments of kindness created echoes of healing, and how acts of harm left wounds that carried forward. This experience is not about guilt, it is about clarity. The soul, Cayce said, cannot lie to itself here. Stripped of excuses and illusions, it is forced to see not just what it did, but who it became through those actions. For many, this is the first time they truly understand the weight of free will. The environment of these days reflects that lesson. Cayce explained that the soul may find itself in radiant halls filled with light, surrounded by energies that lift and inspire, or in dimmer spaces where its unresolved struggles are mirrored back. Yet always, he emphasized, there are guides. The soul is never abandoned. Even when faced with its darkest memories, it is held in an atmosphere of teaching rather than condemnation. The purpose of these revelations is growth, not despair. And for the souls that open to this process, these days become a time of profound healing. They begin to recognize patterns stretching across lives, mistakes repeated, lessons postponed, but also victories achieved and love expressed. The awareness of continuity grows stronger. The soul begins to grasp, nothing is wasted. Every moment, every choice has been part of a larger design. By the second week, Cayce said, the soul often hears what he called a calling. This is not a sound, not a voice in the air, but a deep inner knowing. It is as if the soul suddenly becomes aware of a summons from beyond itself, an invitation to continue toward higher realms of understanding. Some souls resist this pull, still clinging to earthly attachments, relationships, or unfinished desires. Others follow it eagerly, sensing that it leads to greater truth. According to Cayce, this calling draws the soul closer to its soul group, the cluster of spirits with whom it has shared countless lifetimes. The recognition of these familiar presences brings comfort and belonging. For the first time since death, the soul feels not only guided, but embraced, part of a community that transcends a single incarnation. From the 15th day onward, Cayce explained, the soul reaches a critical threshold. This stage is not about clinging to memories of the life just lived. It is about preparing to integrate them into the broader arc of existence. He said that by the third week, the soul begins to remember not only its most recent journey on Earth, but also threads from other incarnations. These are not vague flashes, but vivid realizations that link past and present into a single continuum. Some souls are shaken as they see how unresolved lessons echo across centuries. Others are uplifted as they witness the long chain of growth, love, and service carried from life to life. Cayce emphasized that this remembrance is not random. It has purpose. The soul is shown exactly what it needs to understand at this stage, no more, no less. And through this unveiling, it begins to sense the larger design of its evolution. The atmosphere of these days is one of revelation. Cayce describes souls being guided into what many later interpreted as the Temple of Wisdom, a dimension where higher beings unveil the deeper structure of existence. Here, the soul perceives that nothing was accidental. Every relationship, every triumph, every sorrow carried meaning. Even the smallest choices contributed to shaping the eternal self. For some, this realization is liberating. It dissolves the fear that life was meaningless. For others, it is humbling, as they see the weight of missed opportunities and the repetition of errors. But always, Cayce said, there is an undercurrent of hope. The purpose of these revelations is not despair, but empowerment. The soul is given the chance to choose anew, to commit itself to higher growth, to embrace the possibility of returning to earth or advancing in realms of service. By the 20th day, the soul stands at a crossroads. According to Cayce, this is when many souls make what he called a sacred vow. It is not a vow imposed from outside, but one born from within, a deep recognition of what must be done. Some souls choose to rest, to remain in the spiritual realms for further learning and renewal. Others, stirred by the awareness of unfinished growth, pledge to return in another incarnation. This decision, Cayce emphasized, is not forced. It arises naturally from the soul's expanded vision. In this moment, the eternal self looks across lifetimes and sees where the work of love and healing is still incomplete. And so, by its own free will, it chooses the path forward. On the 21st day, Cayce revealed, a profound shift takes place. The soul, now fully detached from the confusion of earthly death, stands in the presence of its higher self. This is not the personality at war on earth, not the roles it played in a single life. This higher self is radiant, timeless, the truest essence of what it has always been. Meeting it is like returning home after a long exile. It is here that the soul feels its deepest peace since leaving the body. It understands that death was never the end, it was a passage. It sees clearly that its existence stretches far beyond one lifetime, that it belongs to a continuum of learning, love, and divine purpose. And with this recognition, the soul steps fully into the reality of the afterlife, no longer lost, no longer searching, but aware. This is why Cayce insisted the first 21 days are sacred. They shape the soul's direction, they open the doors of remembrance, and they prepare it for the vast journey ahead. Cayce often reminded his audiences that what happens in those first 21 days is not predetermined, it is shaped by the way we live now. He insisted that every choice we make, every thought we cultivate, and every act of love or cruelty becomes part of the soul's environment after death. During the Great Depression, when families came to him in desperation, he warned them that wealth and status would mean nothing beyond the grave, but that kindness, service, and spiritual awareness would become the only currency that mattered. In one of his readings, he explained that even a simple act of forgiveness could echo into the afterlife, surrounding the soul with light at the very moment it departs the body. These teachings struck his listeners with both fear and hope. Fear, because they realized nothing could be hidden. Hope, because even in their darkest moments, they still had the power to create a more luminous path. This is why the 21-day cycle is so transformative. It functions like a mirror, reflecting back the essence of how one has lived. Souls who cultivated compassion often feel embraced immediately by the presence of guides, while those who lived in selfishness may wander through shadows until they release what binds them. Cayce emphasized again and again that no soul is ever abandoned. Even in confusion, help is near. Even in despair, guidance awaits. The difference lies in whether the soul accepts it. He explained that many who resist remain caught in a kind of spiritual fog, replaying memories of anger or regret until they finally choose to move forward. And that choice, he said, is always available. This is not eternal punishment. It is self-imposed delay. What makes the first 21 days so decisive is that the soul begins to realize this truth sooner than later. For modern audiences, these insights carry a startling relevance. In a world that often dismisses death as silence or oblivion, Cayce's revelations suggest that our consciousness continues with astonishing clarity. Scientific skeptics in the 1940s dismissed his trances as imagination, yet families who sat with him in Virginia Beach swore that his descriptions of their deceased loved ones were too detailed, too precise to be invention. Stories emerged of souls lingering at funerals, of presences felt in empty rooms, of visions in dreams that mirrored Cayce's accounts of the early afterlife. For the grieving, these readings provided comfort that death was not a disappearance, but a transition. And for those seeking purpose, they offered a sobering reminder. How we live now is the blueprint for what comes next. So what does this mean for you today? It means the journey of your soul is already unfolding, not only after death, but in every moment of life. The 21 days Cayce described are a continuation of choices being made now. If you choose compassion, you are preparing a path of light. If you cling to bitterness, you are weaving shadows into your own future environment. The message is not one of fear, but of empowerment. Cayce believed that once people understood this, they would no longer be afraid of death. Instead, they would live more fully, with more purpose, more love, and more courage. And that is perhaps the greatest legacy of these revelations. During the years of war, when uncertainty about death surrounded almost every American household, Cayce's words carried an even heavier weight. Families in Virginia Beach and across the country would ask him, "Where is my son now? Where is my husband?" His replies often followed the same rhythm. The soul is not gone. It is walking through stages of awareness, and the first 3 weeks are the most delicate. He reminded them that soldiers who died far from home were not abandoned. Just as surely as the grieving families felt pain in Kentucky or Ohio, those departed souls were being guided through the same universal process, staying near the body at first, then being pulled toward realms of reflection, then finally entering the presence of their higher self. To Cayce, geography didn't matter, culture didn't matter. The sequence was the same, whether death came in a hospital bed, on a battlefield, or in silence at home. He used these explanations to dismantle fear. Rather than picturing their loved ones as lost or trapped, he invited people to see them as continuing students in a school much greater than Earth. The 21-day cycle was only the first class, but it was the foundation of all the learning to come. He compared it to a child leaving home for the first time, frightening, uncertain, but ultimately liberating. This metaphor resonated with his listeners, who found comfort in thinking of the afterlife as a place of education rather than punishment. He insisted that God's design was not about vengeance, but about growth. And if growth is the purpose, then death is not an ending, but a continuation of the curriculum. That is why the soul, in those early days, is never left alone. Guides and teachers appear because learning cannot begin without support. Cayce also pointed out that some souls return briefly to comfort the living during this cycle. Dreams, sudden impressions, or unexplained moments of calm in the midst of grief were often reported by families who had lost someone. He explained that these were not hallucinations. They were permitted crossings, moments when the veil grew thin enough for the departed to deliver a final reassurance. But he warned, such contacts are temporary. The soul cannot linger indefinitely without delaying its own progress. This reminder gave families peace, while also teaching them the importance of letting go. To cling too tightly, Cayce said, was to tether the soul to the very attachments it needed to release. Love should not bind, it should bless. This teaching remains as relevant today as it was nearly a century ago. In a culture where many still fear death or avoid speaking of it, Cayce's revelations give language to what is often left unsaid. They remind us that we are more than flesh, more than breath, more than memory. We are souls eternal and conscious, walking through carefully designed stages that reveal who we truly are. And the first 21 days after death are the threshold where everything begins. If we live with awareness of this truth, then the moment of our departure need not terrify us. It can become what Cayce called a sacred awakening, a return to the self we were always meant to recognize. Cayce never softened the truth. The soul's journey in those first weeks is both beautiful and demanding. He said the process strips away every mask. The roles we played on Earth, our jobs, our titles, even our reputations, fall away instantly. What remains is the essence of what we truly carried inside. For some, this unveiling is a relief, like taking off a heavy costume. For others, it is a shock, as all pretenses are exposed at once. That is why the guides and teachers appear, to steady the soul during this vulnerable period. Their task is not to punish, but to remind, not to scold, but to point the way forward. And every soul, Cayce assured, no matter how broken or burdened, is offered this guidance. None are forgotten, None are left in darkness without a hand reaching through. The only question is whether the soul will recognize and accept that help. It was in the context of ordinary people, farmers in Kentucky, mothers in Virginia Beach, workers worn down by the Depression, that Cayce delivered these insights. They were not abstract theories, they were answers to desperate questions. He explained that when a loved one dies, the prayers of the living become like signals of light reaching across the divide. Souls in the 21-day passage feel them. They are strengthened by them. That is why Cayce encouraged families not to despair, but to pray, to hold thoughts of peace and release. These thoughts, he said, are like bridges, helping the soul cross more easily into the realm where its higher self waits. Imagine what that means. Your silent prayer, your whispered goodbye, your tearful blessing. They are not empty gestures. They are currents of real power that shape the environment your loved one experiences in the afterlife. By the end of the 3rd week, when the soul stands before its higher self, all of this converges. The life lived, the memories reviewed, the lessons revealed, the calling heard, the soul group embraced. All of it culminates in a single moment of clarity. And in that clarity, the soul decides rest, return, or rise. This is why Cayce insisted that life on earth matters so deeply. The way we live today is the material our soul must work with tomorrow. Every kindness becomes a light. Every cruelty becomes a shadow. And in the 21st day, when we face ourselves without illusion, these lights and shadows form the reality we cannot escape. The good news, Cayce said, is that we are always free to choose differently. Every soul is given another chance, another path, another step toward wholeness. Death does not end choice, it magnifies it. So when we speak of the mystery of the first 21 days, we are not speaking of something distant or irrelevant. We are speaking of your journey, my journey, the journey of every human who will ever live. Cayce's revelations do more than describe the afterlife. They challenge us to live with more intention now, to forgive more readily, to love more fiercely, to serve more humbly, because all of it will be waiting for us when our own moment arrives. That is the sacred weight of these teachings. They are not meant to frighten us, but to awaken us to the eternal truth, that we are spiritual beings, temporarily clothed in flesh, destined for a passage far greater than any earthly chapter. Now that you understand what Cayce revealed about the first 21 days after death, the question turns back to you. What are you doing today that your soul will carry into that journey? Cayce insisted that nothing is wasted. Every moment of kindness becomes light in the afterlife. Every act of forgiveness becomes a bridge. Every thought of love becomes a shield. And the opposite is also true. Resentment, cruelty, and selfishness do not vanish when the body dies. They travel with the soul and shape what it experiences in those sacred weeks. The good news is that you are not powerless. Right now, in this very moment, you are writing the script your soul will live after death. And knowing this truth should not fill you with fear, it should fill you with purpose. Because if the afterlife is a mirror, then every loving choice today polishes that mirror with light. So the invitation is simple. Live as if those 21 days begin now. Speak the words of kindness you have been holding back. Offer the forgiveness you've delayed. Share the love you thought could wait until tomorrow. Because tomorrow is never guaranteed, but the soul's journey always is. Cayce's message was never about predicting death. It was about preparing for life. Life that continues, life that evolves, life that expands beyond the grave. If these revelations stirred something inside you, let us know in the comments. We read every single one, and when your words add light to the conversation, we'll mark them with a heart as our way of saying thank you. And don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this message with someone who needs it. Together, we are building a community that faces death not with fear, but with understanding, and that faces life not with despair, but with courage. Remember, the soul is eternal and the journey never ends. Imminent danger. This color has a hidden impact. The words sound dramatic, but behind them lies one of the most unsettling revelations from the life and work of Edgar Cayce. Imagine being told that the very colors surrounding you, on your walls, in your clothes, even in the food you eat, carry vibrations that can heal, energize, or silently weaken your mind and body. During one of his most impactful readings in the early 1930s, at the height of the Great Depression, Cayce described how specific colors could either align a person with harmony or push them toward imbalance and illness. He warned that misuse of certain tones was not just cosmetic, it could be dangerous. And that word dangerous was not used lightly. He said it while under trance, his voice calm but firm, and those in the room that day never forgot the gravity of the statement. What does it mean that a simple color could hold such weight over our lives? In Virginia Beach, during countless sessions, Cayce explained that colors are not mere shades for decoration, but living frequencies, energies vibrating at specific levels, influencing human consciousness. He pointed out that the color red, when overused, could agitate the nervous system, sparking anger, restlessness, and even violence. Blue, on the other hand, brought serenity, cooling the nerves, aiding sleep, and opening the spirit to higher inspiration. Green worked as a balance, harmonizing the body and emotions, useful for spaces where healing was needed. Yet the warning was always clear. Misuse leads to imbalance. That is why Cayce often urged people to become conscious of the colors they brought into their homes, their clothing, and even their diets. He insisted that colors could serve as a bridge to higher states of mind, or as a barrier that locked the soul in conflict. Think about this. We are surrounded by colors every moment of our lives. What if the constant presence of one specific shade was slowly reshaping your emotional state, your thoughts, your very health, without you realizing it? Cayce revealed that red, while powerful and energizing, carried the potential for imminent danger if allowed to dominate a person's environment. Too much red could overstimulate, drive impulsive behavior, and disturb sleep. In his words, "The vibrations are real. They act upon the human aura as surely as heat acts upon water." This was not poetry. For Cayce, it was a scientific reality, long before modern physics began to confirm that light and color are energy. During a session that changed the life of an entire family, Cayce advised a mother whose child suffered from violent outbursts to remove all red fabrics from his room. Curtains, bedspread, even toys. Replace them with calming blues and soft greens. Within weeks, she reported a transformation. The child's restless nights eased, his anger diminished, and peace began to return to their home. This was not magic. It was the hidden impact of color vibrations. And Cayce insisted that the world ignored these truths at its peril. He saw colors as both medicine and poison, depending on how they were applied. The hidden impact of color goes beyond personal moods. Cayce suggested that entire societies could be influenced by the tones they embraced. He noted that in times of war, the prevalence of aggressive colors like red and black surged, feeding collective tension. In contrast, periods of peace and healing were marked by a cultural shift toward lighter tones, whites, blues, pastels. This observation was not abstract. In the 1940s, during the war years, he spoke about how environments saturated in harsh colors only deepened the unease and unrest already consuming humanity. He believed that if communities consciously surrounded themselves with harmonizing colors, they could create conditions for healing not just of individuals, but of entire nations. But here is the disturbing part. Cayce also warned that ignoring these truths opened the door to suffering. He said that many of the nervous disorders, unexplained anxieties, and even violent impulses afflicting people in his time were aggravated by environments soaked in imbalanced colors. Imagine factories painted in harsh metallic reds and blacks, where workers spent 10-12 hours a day. Imagine hospitals where walls lacked soothing tones, leaving patients restless and anxious instead of comforted. He believed these choices were not random, but reflections of a deeper spiritual ignorance. In his words, when man neglects the harmony of his surroundings, he neglects the harmony of his soul. This is where the urgency comes in, because Cayce's words echo with a warning still relevant today. Our modern lives are filled with screens glowing in bright artificial light, homes decorated with trends that often ignore natural harmony, and clothing chosen without awareness of vibrational impact. We live in environments that may be silently shaping our health, our moods, and our spiritual connection. And if Cayce was right, and many who followed his advice testify he was, then this hidden impact is not a small matter. It is imminent, present, unavoidable, unless we learn to see and adjust the colors that surround us every single day. Cayce's descriptions of colors were never superficial. He saw them as gateways to the deepest layers of human experience, each shade carrying a symbolic resonance as well as a physiological effect. Take violet, for example. He referred to it as a spiritual color, often connected with inspiration, meditation, and contact with the higher realms. Yet he also warned that too much violet in a person's environment could detach them from practical responsibilities, leaving them dreamy, unfocused, and even withdrawn from the reality of daily life. In contrast, the color yellow, bright and radiant, carried the vibration of intellect, clarity, and mental energy. It stimulated thought, sharpened concentration, and encouraged optimism. But Cayce cautioned that an excess of yellow could overstimulate the mind, leading to nervous strain or obsession with details, cutting off the flow of intuitive wisdom. One of the most fascinating points Cayce made about color was its direct connection with the human body's energy centers, or what he described in terms that today resemble the chakra system known in Eastern traditions. He suggested that each color resonates with a specific point in the body: red with the base of the spine, orange with the creative centers, yellow with the solar plexus, green with the heart, blue with the throat, indigo with the mind's eye, and violet with the crown of spiritual awareness. These were not abstract associations for him. They were practical indicators of how light, vibration, and human health intertwined. He explained that when people surrounded themselves with colors corresponding to areas of weakness or imbalance, they could unintentionally amplify disharmony. On the other hand, consciously choosing balancing colors could aid healing, both physically and spiritually. Consider the case of a woman who sought Cayce's advice during the war years. She suffered from recurring throat infections, anxiety, and a feeling of being silenced in her own family. In trance, Cayce recommended that she spend time each day in a room with soft blue light and incorporate blue fabrics into her clothing. Blue, he said, would soothe her nervous system, calm her emotions, and empower her self-expression. Within months, she reported not only fewer illnesses, but also a newfound confidence in speaking her truth. This was the hidden impact of color, revealed not through theory, but through lived experience. It wasn't only individuals who benefited from this wisdom. Cayce often spoke about how hospitals, schools, and places of worship could dramatically improve outcomes if they paid attention to colors. A school painted in harsh, overly bright tones could create restlessness and lack of focus in children. A hospital lacking green, the color of balance and healing, could slow recovery. Churches without uplifting tones like white or violet risked failing to inspire their congregations spiritually. Cayce was essentially teaching that the invisible environment of vibration was as important as the visible structure of walls and roofs. This message was radical at a time when most people thought of colors as nothing more than decoration. And then there was white, the color Cayce saw as embodying purity, unity, and the integration of all other vibrations. He encouraged its use in meditation spaces, clothing during prayer, and healing practices. Yet he also made a striking observation. Pure white, when isolated, could feel cold, sterile, or overwhelming, stripping away individuality. That is why he often emphasized the blending of colors, urging people to seek harmony rather than extremes. For him, the true danger was not any single color in itself, but the imbalance that came from excess or ignorance. Red alone was not evil. Blue alone was not salvation. It was the unconscious use of these energies that opened the door to imbalance. This is why Cayce's warning remains urgent. The danger is hidden precisely because most people never think about it. We choose colors based on fashion, convenience, or chance. Yet Cayce insisted that every shade we surround ourselves with is shaping our inner world. It might energize us, soothe us, or push us into states of agitation and conflict. And because these influences are subtle and constant, they can build up quietly over weeks, months, and years, until suddenly a person finds themselves unwell, anxious, or spiritually disconnected, never suspecting that their own environment played a role. His point was not to inspire fear, but to awaken awareness. For Cayce, the moment we learn to see colors as vibrations, we reclaim power over our health and our destiny. In several readings preserved in the ARE archives, Cayce spoke directly about the therapeutic use of light and color. He described how projecting colored light onto the body could assist in restoring balance to the nervous system, organs, and even the mind. During a session in Virginia Beach in the 1930s, he explained that when specific vibrations of color were directed toward weakened areas of the body, they acted as subtle medicines, stimulating natural healing rather than forcing artificial results. For example, he recommended the use of green light for those suffering from heart and circulation problems, noting its calming and harmonizing effect. For individuals battling depression or fatigue, he often mentioned the benefits of soft golden tones, connecting them with vitality and hope. This was long before color therapy became a recognized alternative practice in the modern era, yet Cayce's insights laid the foundation for what many healers later explored in depth. But Cayce didn't stop at physical healing. He emphasized that colors carried spiritual messages. He linked them with music, saying that each vibration of color corresponded to a musical note. Together, sound and color created a universal language of harmony, one that spoke not to the mind but to the soul. He explained that when individuals prayed or meditated with both harmonious sounds and balanced colors around them, they could reach states of consciousness far beyond ordinary awareness. In one session, he described how the sight of violet light in meditation often indicated that a person was entering a higher realm of inspiration, connecting with divine guidance. Blue tones, combined with soft music, could ease the transition into prayer, allowing the individual to quiet the mind and open the heart. For Cayce, the world of spirit was not abstract, it was vibrational, and colors were part of the bridge. What is especially striking is how he saw the misuse of colors as a form of spiritual negligence. In one case, a man struggling with violent temper sought Cayce's guidance. Under trance, Cayce told him that the constant presence of red and black in his clothing and home decor was amplifying his aggression. He advised replacing these with softer blues and greens, creating an atmosphere that supported patience and compassion. This was not a dismissal of the man's responsibility for his actions, but rather an acknowledgement that the environment was feeding his weakness instead of strengthening his higher nature. The man followed the suggestion, and according to records, those around him began to notice a gradual shift. His anger lessened, his sleep improved, and his interactions became more stable. This brings us to the hidden danger in our own time. We live in a world saturated with artificial colors, fluorescent lights, glowing screens, advertising signs designed to shock and grab attention. Cayce warned that constant exposure to unbalanced vibrations could erode the nervous system, overstimulate the brain, and disconnect the soul from higher awareness. Imagine the hours spent in front of a bright red notification symbol on your phone, or the cold blue glow of a screen late at night. Without realizing it, we may be submitting ourselves to vibrations that pull us away from peace, harmony, and health. This is precisely why Cayce's teachings feel more urgent now than when he first spoke them. The danger is not distant, it is imminent, woven into the very texture of modern life. The solution Cayce offered was both simple and profound: awareness. He believed that once a person understood the impact of colors, they could make conscious choices to create balance. This could be as practical as choosing calming tones for bedrooms, energizing colors for workspaces, and spiritual colors for places of prayer. He urged people to bring harmony into their lives, not by avoiding all strong colors, but by blending them wisely. In his view, balance was the key. Just as the body requires both rest and activity, the spirit requires both grounding and inspiration. Red could energize when used sparingly. Blue could soothe, but too much might lead to passivity. Green could heal, but alone it might not inspire. Only harmony could unlock the full potential of human life. Cayce also touched on how colors appeared in profound spiritual experiences, including visions during prayer, dreams, and even near-death states. He noted that individuals often reported seeing specific hues at the threshold of these altered states, and he explained that these were not random hallucinations, but genuine reflections of the soul's condition. Those who glimpsed brilliant white or violet light were often in touch with higher levels of spiritual awareness, receiving reassurance that they were aligned with divine purpose. Others, however, described darker, muddier tones, greys, browns, or deep reds, which Cayce interpreted as signs of inner conflict, unresolved fears, or attachments to material concerns. In one reading that left a family astonished, Cayce described how their loved one, who had hovered between life and death, had seen a radiant green light. He explained that this represented healing energy flowing into the soul, signaling that the body was being restored, and indeed the person recovered in the days that followed. The theme of colors as gateways to spiritual realms runs throughout Cayce's teachings. He often tied this to what he called the Christ consciousness, the awareness of unity between the human soul and the divine. For Cayce, colors were not only external vibrations, but also internal reflections of the soul's journey. Red symbolized the earthly struggles of survival and passion. Blue and green represented the harmonies of balance and service. Violet and white pointed toward the infinite, the soul's connection with God. He urged people to see colors not as superficial, but as invitations to grow, to refine, and to evolve. He once remarked that the soul clothed itself in vibrations, and colors were among the most visible signs of this unseen reality. This understanding was especially powerful during the years of war, when fear and uncertainty filled the air. Cayce spoke of how nations themselves projected colors through their collective consciousness. He suggested that societies drenched in aggressive, fiery tones revealed their unrest, while those embracing softer hues demonstrated a collective desire for peace. This may sound abstract, yet Cayce pointed to tangible examples. Wartime propaganda often relied heavily on reds and blacks, stirring emotions of fear, anger, and urgency. In contrast, movements for peace and healing tended to use whites, blues, and greens, invoking harmony and compassion. It was as if the very battle for human destiny was being fought not only with weapons, but also with vibrations of color influencing the spirit of entire populations. For the modern listener, the question is simple, yet profound. What colors are you allowing into your life? Cayce's warning about imminent danger was never about superstition, it was about responsibility. If colors are vibrations, then every choice we make, what we wear, where we live, how we decorate, what we consume, shapes the atmosphere of our soul. Surrounded by the wrong vibrations, we risk agitation, illness, even spiritual stagnation. But when we choose with awareness, we open ourselves to healing, inspiration, and transformation. The danger, then, is not in the colors themselves, but in ignoring their power. Cayce's legacy is a call to awaken, to see what has been hidden in plain sight, and to use it for our growth instead of our downfall. Modern science has, in many ways, begun to validate what Cayce declared decades before his time. Psychologists now acknowledge the impact of color on mood and behavior. Hospitals increasingly paint patient rooms in calming blues and greens because studies show that recovery times improve when people are surrounded by these tones. Corporations use bright reds and yellows in advertising to spark urgency and appetite. Exactly the overstimulation Cayce warned about. Neuroscience confirms that exposure to certain wavelengths of light directly influences the brain's production of hormones, shaping sleep patterns, alertness, and emotional states. When researchers demonstrate how blue light from screens disrupts melatonin and damages sleep, we hear an echo of Cayce's voice, reminding us that careless use of color can undermine health and harmony. Even in medicine, color therapy, once dismissed as fringe, has found its place in supportive treatments. Light boxes emitting specific frequencies are prescribed for seasonal affective disorder. Green light therapy is being explored for chronic pain. These advances sound new, but Cayce's readings described them long before laboratories could measure the effects. His language was not clinical. He spoke of vibrations and harmony. Yet the essence of his teaching is strikingly similar. Color is not cosmetic, it is energetic. And when harnessed wisely, it can transform the body and soul. One might wonder why Cayce placed such urgency on the subject, using terms like danger and hidden impact. The answer lies in how easily we dismiss the invisible forces shaping our lives. It is simple to overlook the power of color because it surrounds us constantly, silently influencing us without demand for attention. For Cayce, this ignorance was perilous. He believed that spiritual growth requires awareness of all influences, seen and unseen. To ignore color was to allow a subtle but constant current to steer us away from balance. He urged families to become mindful, to create spaces of intentional harmony, to wear colors that supported their spiritual path, and to remember that every choice carried consequence. His message, though rooted in the early 20th century, feels tailored for today's world. Screens, advertisements, and artificial environments bombard us with vibrations designed not to heal but to control attention and behavior. Cayce's caution about imminent danger takes on a new dimension when we realize that entire industries now manipulate colors to capture human minds. He would likely remind us that without conscious awareness, we surrender not only our attention, but our health and spiritual vitality. The hidden impact he spoke of has become a daily reality for billions, making his teachings more relevant than ever. Cayce's conclusion about color was always practical. He never wanted people to live in fear of the vibrations around them. Instead, he invited them to take responsibility, to use colors as tools for healing, inspiration, and spiritual growth. He advised meditating on soft blue light to calm the mind, surrounding oneself with green when the heart or body needed balance, or welcoming violet in prayer to lift the soul toward divine communion. He taught that white light, the sum of all colors, could be envisioned as a shield of protection during meditation, aligning the aura with purity and peace. These were not metaphors for him. They were lived realities, ways of consciously shaping the inner and outer environment to reflect the harmony of spirit. For Cayce, awareness was the safeguard against danger. The colors themselves were not enemies. The peril came from misuse, excess, and ignorance. Just as too much salt can spoil food, too much of one vibration could overwhelm the soul. Harmony, blending, and intention were the keys. He urged people to ask themselves daily, what vibrations am I allowing into my life? Do they uplift or do they agitate? In that awareness lay the power to transform. When families followed his guidance, removing harsh reds from children's rooms, choosing green for healing, white for meditation, they often reported not only physical improvements, but also deeper peace in their homes. And this is the final message. The danger is real, but so is the opportunity. Colors are everywhere, shaping your mind, your health, your spirit. You cannot escape their influence, but you can choose how to use it. Cayce's words still ring true. When we align with the right vibrations, we draw closer to harmony with ourselves, with others, and with God. When we ignore them, we risk chaos within and around us. The hidden impact is always at work, whether for healing or for harm, depending on the choices we make each day. So as you look around your life, ask, what colors surround you right now? What impact are they leaving on your spirit? The answer may reveal more than you ever imagined. And if you want to dive even deeper into Cayce's forgotten wisdom and discover more secrets hidden in plain sight, stay with this channel. Because every week, we reveal truths that have the power to reshape not just your thinking, but your entire reality. If this message resonated with you, subscribe, share this video, and let others know what you felt. Together, we can bring awareness to what has been hidden for too long. The choice is yours. Remain blind to the danger or awaken to the power of color as Cayce revealed it.